Hello, and welcome to the Atheist Experience. Now, I bet you're wondering why Matt is not in here. In just a moment, after a very special announcement, we will bring in your regular hosts. However, sitting here, I'm proud to be able to make a very special announcement. We live in a world where there is a lot of work to be done and a lot of, charity work, helping other people that needs to happen. And as an atheist or just a secular person that doesn't use that word, that can be very difficult because a lot of that gets organized through the local church, the local religious organization. However, luckily for all of us nuns out here, there is an organization that helps supply much needed charity work and support for local groups. When disaster strikes, whether that's a hurricane or superstitious beliefs that tear families and communities apart, there is an organization that responds and helps you respond as well. And that organization is Foundation Beyond Belief. And I have with me here Noelle George, the Executive Director of Foundation Beyond Belief. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Yeah.
I'm having a good day.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, we're talking about nuns who don't believe in religion, not the types that wear the habit.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what Foundation Beyond Belief does?
Well, we do a lot of things, but the reason that I'm here today is because we assist local groups all around the U.S. in planning service events in their communities. One of the best ways to humanize us and let people know that we're here and that we help is to make a positive difference in our communities. It helps people understand that we're human beings, and it helps them understand that our worldview is one to be valued, not one to be afraid of or ridiculed. So it's an extremely important part of what everyone in the general atheist community around the U.S. and around the world does. And we have a program at Foundation Beyond Belief called the Beyond Belief Network. We help those local groups in 150 different cities in the U.S. at this point. We provide them with tools, with resources. We help them remove barriers to having successful service events. Yeah. We help new groups that want to try having service events. So
if I didn't have the ACA, I wouldn't know how to help out at all. Well, I'd like to think that I would find some way, but certainly Foundation Beyond Belief makes that a lot easier.
Yeah, it's much easier when you have somebody that kind of can help you know what has worked and what hasn't worked.
Yeah, you don't have to start from square one.
Right.
You can use answers that have already been found.
Right, and it's not just us. The 150 groups talk to each other. They share ideas. So it's not just us saying, oh, do this, do that. It's very much led by the groups.
Yeah. Which, I mean, you've been invited on, and I'm very proud to announce that in conjunction with all of the various elements of the ACA, we have decided to partner with Foundation Beyond Belief and support their efforts, particularly the Beyond Belief Network, which is their program to help those local groups get that done. And so I'm proud to be able to present you with this definitely not just symbolic giant check of money that we have raised to help support that. Because no one who doesn't believe should have to go to a church that they disagree with in order to feed the homeless or help the needy or the sick. So thank you for all the efforts that you have done and will continue to do.
Well, thank you to the ACA for providing us with this great opportunity to partner with you and to aid local groups. If you are a local group leader and you're interested in doing service events, please visit us at our website, foundationbeyondbelief.org, and sign up for the Beyond Belief Network. As you can see, we have a lot of ways to help you at this moment. So thanks to the ACA, we're very, very grateful for what you're doing, and happy that you're choosing to impact the whole country.
Well, it takes human hands to solve human problems. I see that you're here because we're not going to count on God to appear, so we might as well get used to it. Thank you for coming out today, and I'm glad to support.
Thank you, ACA.
And thank you to our live studio audience, as always. Now, don't touch that aisle. Your regular programming is coming up. But first, a message from the ACA.
Make this Valentine's Day one to remember. It's time to get sexy. Live in Austin, Texas, An intimate performance by recording artist Shelley Siegel follows a live taping of Secular Sexuality. Food is included and drinks will be available for purchase. Get your tickets now by going to eventbrite.com and search for Secular Sexuality. That's eventbrite.com, search Secular Sexuality.
To be safe.
This shot. Hey. Ready?
And I'm really happy that we had Jamie and Noel in here to make that announcement, present them with the check. But welcome back to the live show. And don't worry, you didn't lose any time to that at all, because I'll probably end up talking for, I don't know, 2.5, 17 hours straight or something. We'll just take calls until they're done. And if anybody needs to leave, they can. But I'm happy to be here. I'm Matt Dillahunty. Welcome to the Atheist Experience. Joining me this week, John Iacoletti. Hello. And a very special guest, which some of you watched earlier today on Talk Heathen, Hector Garcia. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for coming down. Hector's latest book, Alpha God, is something that we'll talk a little bit about here, and we'll get to calls as well. And also, we wanted to mention that not only can you go buy this book, which you probably should, but the audiobook, which was narrated by my friend Seth Andrews, is out as well. Yeah. It's great. Whenever my book, if ever my book gets done, I will do my own audiobook. But if you're not going to do it yourself and you can't get Morgan Freeman, you should get Seth Andrews.
That's not the latest one, though. This is the latest one.
This is the latest.
This is the latest. It's
I'm a
coming out
book
in 2
behind.
weeks, but yeah.
We should hold them up. Let's hold them up.
Hold them all up. Alpha God and Sex,
busy.
Power, and Partisanship. That's a lot. And so I pick either book or both, and tell us what's the crux of what you're working toward. What's the message that you're trying to get to people through this, and how are you going about it?
Well, one's on religion, and the other's on politics, the two things you're not supposed to talk about, so go figure.
Perfect.
Using evolutionary psychology to understand our political and religious behaviors in Alpha God, which I think we're going to talk about because you've delved into that.
Yeah.
Looking at how we project our primate legacy onto our notions of God, and using that to understand religious violence. So we have a God that has all the omnis, omnipresent, omnipotent, ultimate power, never dies, not of bodily form. But this God is describing as being intensely interested in these concerns that really betray his biological origins: territory, sexual control, deference, submission. An all-powerful God shouldn't have interest in these things.
It's almost like some people got together and said, wow, we're worried about all these things and we don't have answers, so let's make up somebody who does.
Let's make somebody who does that resonates with our own psychology. It's emotionally intuitive to us because we evolved in hierarchically organized groups where there was a dominant male at its apex, and so that figure is intuitive to us. We follow it into battle. We follow its orders to commit genocide and violence and oppression of women. So unmasking this God, that was the intention.
And, while I certainly agree with that, the oppression goes beyond that as well, to where once you get this structure, it creates an us and them thing, so that we're going to oppress all of the others. Sure. But there are some others that we're going to oppress slightly more than others, perhaps.
Sure.
The ones that fit in the least, or the ones that are typically viewed as somehow being less than. It says, when you titled this Alpha God, and it reminded me immediately of, Alpha Wolf and all this stuff. And I know from people I've talked to that, evolutionary psychology gets a bad rap on a number of occasions. I think because some people, once they get a hold of this great idea, once you have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And so they try to apply it to absolutely everything. But it's seemingly undeniable that through our physical history, both with nature and nurture applying to this, it has helped create the sort of psychology that we have today. And this affects every interaction we have. So to me, it's not that remarkable that, that you could make fitting assessments using evolutionary psychology. And yes, I balked at the alpha thing too. For the person who's getting ready to email in to say, hey, that whole alpha wolf thing, that wasn't real. And the guy that first presented it spent the rest of his life trying to say that wasn't real. irrespective of what that is, and Hector and I talked about this for just a second earlier, it's taken on a new meaning. That's what we do with words. Yeah. And so even if it doesn't apply to the original scenario, it's undeniable that in the context of what we're talking about, there's a package of things like, domineering and controlling and assertive or charismatic that we have since labeled alpha. Now no longer matters what the wolves did or didn't do.
Sure, it doesn't. And what matters is what primates do, because we're primates.
Yeah.
And I like to operationally define terms and what does it mean to be alpha? It means to have preferential access to things that are relevant to our biological reproduction and survival. So preferential access to mates, territory, goods, food, deference, respect, pride. So dominant individuals of any group have more access to those kinds of things.
It seems, over the course of the years on the show, obviously we have people call in, tell us what you believe and why, and more importantly, why you think somebody else should believe it. You're not so much looking at the facts or the philosophical arguments about a God as much as a plausible explanation for the structure of God claims emanating from human psychology.
Why do we have the gods that we have? And the subtitle, The Psychology of Religious Violence and Oppression, it's to explain that, to explain the darker sides of religion. Where does it come from? Gods are our model, because most religions have a God concept. And, if that God is based on a territorial, acquisitive, sexually acquisitive male that has violent tendencies, well, we're really talking about us. And so all these projections need to be unpackaged and analyzed and put under the light of scrutiny. Otherwise, we're just going to enact these patterns over and over and over again. And that is the beauty of evolutionary science, because it allows us to look at these things objectively.
One of the things that's bothered me over the years is when people try to oversimplify religion by, it's the opiate of the masses, or it's just about controlling people. Because it seems to me, as someone who is a former believer and having engaged with a lot of believers, that that's too simplistic, that there are things that are being offered by religion to quell our fears, some of which the religions created those fears in the first place.
Sure.
So when you look at it from this alpha God perspective of a top-down thing, yeah, we have a pretty good reason to think that it might also be bottom-up in some instances where a collective of people believed this, and this just became their culture for the various reasons that you're talking about here. And then as new people came in, things change because we're still human and we have arguments and conversations about things.
Sure. Religions evolve, but I think what's interesting is what stays resonates with our evolved psychology. The religions that really caught on, more than half the world's believers believe in an Abrahamic God, is a dominant, powerful male God that just fits to a T the primates of the primordial tribe. That's what makes it stick. That's what makes it emotionally intuitive to us.
So anytime we're talking about the history or origin of religions, we get into some sticky situations because obviously I don't have a time machine and we're dealing with history, we're dealing with complex scenarios of different tribes and cultures interacting and people expressing different thoughts. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're presenting, it seemed to me, is a plausible explanation for how we got to where we are, but not a specific, here's the path that these various religions took from spiritism, animism, down to this, because I don't know that we could actually test or falsify that. I think the closest we can maybe get is this seems to be a plausible explanation based on what we know on how humans act and how they think.
Yeah, well, I do touch on that a little bit in the first chapter just to set everything up. I mean, other scholars have done that. Robert Wright is somebody I cite a lot in his book, Evolution of God. It talks about that progression, and really it came out of a very, according to him and other religious scholars, an incredibly dangerous and bloody history in the Fertile Crescent, where people were just at war with each other all the time, hacking each other to pieces with these dull bronze weapons, and there was a need to consolidate power. There was a need to consolidate, differing religions so that they can be controlled under one dominant male god who led you into battle and enforced the tribal identity, and that's how the history is explained by Robert Wright, and I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of possible models that all seem plausible and reasonable. And the sticking point for me is always, okay, here, let me put on my theist hat.
Right.
But Hector, the reason they were fighting each other is because there really is a God who wanted them to do that. How do you can't just discount that there is a God and look at, the effects and say, oh, this would lead us to believe this is why they created this God.
Right.
You're putting the cart before the horse, sir.
Yeah, well, I don't usually get into those arguments as much. I leave that to people like you. You probably have a better way of arguing that. But
it's fun for me because it ties into something else. By the way, you can support the Atheist Community of Austin, the Atheist Experience, and all the various other programs through their Patreons, which I'm sure they'll put links up here as well. I have my own Patreon, and I'm working on the final videos for January and the first videos for March. One of them is going to stem from a conversation that I had with, let's say, a close relative who has lost their mind to the point where when we were having a discussion, I presented data. And the response was, well, why would you trust that data? And I sat there flummoxed for a little while of, okay, well, I can explain to you that, here's this data which has been collected, it's been independently verified. I'm only putting as much confidence, I'm not saying it's absolutely correct, and certainly data can be misinterpreted, misused, et cetera. But what struck me afterwards was that I presented data, they presented nothing other than, I don't have any reason to believe your data.
Yeah, and that impulse is very, it's built on these evolutionary foundations. I mean, we were talking about this earlier about the tendency for people to engage in motivated reasoning. It's meant to quell fear. It's meant to quell terror. And I can tell you briefly about this interesting study that I talked about earlier, putting highly partisan individuals, people who are highly liberal and highly conservative, and presenting them with conflicting comments by their candidates, and watching them engage in motivated reasoning. But the interesting thing about this study is they did it in an MRI machine, and they saw what parts of the brain get lit up.
Oh, was it a comparison like the "what do I think" versus "what does God think" type?
It was their candidate says something conflicting, that contradicts himself, and watching people make excuses for that in an MRI machine and seeing what parts of the brain light up when you engage in motivated reasoning, and it's the parts of the brain that register fear and pain and threat. So a lot of that comes with, having to identify with the tribe, feeling terrified about going against your tribe's chosen person, your tribe's chosen stance. That's terrifying to people. So people will do all kinds of mental acrobatics to avoid that kind of fear. So yeah, data falls flat against that. There's all kinds of defenses against data that are very primitive, very old.
John, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. One of my biggest questions is, why do women go along with this? Yeah. Because it's been my observation in pretty much every religion, it's the women who keep who enforce the rules and keep the people in line and go to the church regularly and kind of drag the men along. So in this concept of male dominance, why do the women do that?
Yeah, I think it's complicated. I think in part they do that because they're forced to. I think there are a lot of social consequences in these male-oriented religions to people who don't abide, especially to women, and it's often violent. I think there are qualities about the alpha god concept that mirrors what women have historically sought after in men, sought after protectors, because for most of our history, tribes engaged in these, full-scale raids on other tribes where they killed all the men, took all the women as sexual slaves, and that went on over and over and over. So, there are studies looking at what women prefer. Women prefer, generally speaking,
sure,
larger, more formidable males, especially when they're ovulating. That has, that can serve a protective function.
So I should sit up straighter in my chair
and flex. There's even research showing that women tend to prefer men with light facial scars as opposed to men that don't have that, which suggests a fighting history. So, God in the Abrahamic faith is described as a protector God. That's one of the main functions that he serves. I'm going to protect the tribe.
So a note to all the incels: you should go out and get rough and tumble until you get a good scar, and maybe things will be easier. It's I like the question, and I know that he kind of already addressed this, but it popped in my mind while he was talking that this is what I talk about when I say you put together a plausible case. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think any of these are necessarily, here's a rock solid, falsifiable thing that you could go back and test. But this is about who we are, and it seems almost undeniable. So it was obvious to me that, by and large, throughout history, you might as well have asked, why do women go along with men?
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing, and there are many, many reasons that some of them do, and not all of them. So good for the ones who are bucking the trend. Which, by the way, it struck me as odd. Not only did your question about women being the core of a lot of modern churches, especially in black churches, the black women that are there. I mean, that's their church. Quite often. And yes, there's always going to be a guy at the head of it, or almost always. But we've seen this play out, and I've just now completely forgot where I was going. So welcome to live TV.
I do that all the time.
It just struck me as interesting that, we're talking about these dynamics. We're talking about what people actually, we're not rational beings all the time. We can strive to be, but we will fail. And religions play on those motivations. And the complex nature of human interactions is, I don't think it's something that you can easily summarize. But when you put together a case that is plausible, all of a sudden, new ideas are popping up. Oh, well, it's that way because of this. Oh, it's that way because of this. And while you may in fact be right, or my supposition or the little insight that I had just now might be right as well, we still have to do due diligence and figure out, okay, does it just feel right, or is there some way to show that I'm more likely right than not?
Right. Yeah, and that's why, when you make a supposition like that, back it up with empirical research. Try to look at what is known, what is plausible, and cite accordingly. That's the thing about psych research. It's hard to test. You can't really touch a thought. You have to measure it through questionnaires and things like that.
And don't have any postmodernists involved in the discussion.
Yeah, that could...
We'll chuck truth out the window and, just poop on the board right away. But well, we want to move on to some callers. Do we have more?
Yeah, we can do some callers.
Cool.
I might want to ask another question at some point.
At any point.
Okay.
We've got... Traci in Lubbock, you're on the air with Matt, John, and Hector.
Hi, Matt, John, and Hector. How you guys been?
Hi, Traci.
Pretty good. It said you had a question for us today.
I've got two questions for you. The first is you'll notice I moved to Lubbock because I got a good job out here.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah, Texas is great. Okay, so I got my little notepad here. And since the last time I called, I've been doing a lot of research. I got a book explaining the various religions. I've started reading the Bible for myself and made it halfway through Exodus. Boy,
it's farther than I got.
Dick A. Rowling, I'll tell you, it is long-winded, hard to read. Let's see, as I've been reading the Bible, I have come to discover, kind of what John talked about just now. It was written by men for men.
Sure.
And Hector he is so right about the Alpha God concept, not to mention all the atrocities in there. And I'm not saying that's all thanks to men, but okay, so let me move on.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, it kind of is. Let's just be real.
I got into a discussion yesterday. Somebody, we're January 26th, and they were citing that there have been 29 mass shootings in the first 26 days of 2019, and they're defining mass shooting in a particular way where there are, I think it's 4 or more victims or 5 or more victims. It doesn't matter. It's all too much, even if the stats are wrong. But you can go on and look at the police reports for all of them. How many of those 29 was the shooter a woman?
Probably 0%.
I agree.
Yeah.
Probably 0%.
And,
I know it.
That's my actual, I'm not anti-gun like a number of my friends. I'm fine with the Second Amendment and stuff. Without getting into it in too much detail, I do have a solution to the gun problem, which is that only women can own guns. And once you do that, now all of a sudden, in heteronormative relationships, there's a lot less incentive for guys to be abusive or cheat or whatever because she's packing.
Yeah. I would entrust women to that task. Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead with your question. I'm sorry, Tracy. Go ahead.
Oh, that's fine. I love to hear you guys talk. Okay. That being said, here's where I'm going to go out on a limb, and I hope I don't sound like a nut job. What if the Bible, yeah, I heard somebody laugh. What if the Bible is an inaccurate portrayal of God? Like, okay, what if he actually does exist and he's a really cool guy?
Okay, so you mean like the God of some other religion? I mean, because that's what every other religion, any religion that doesn't adhere to the Bible that has a God is basically that scenario you're describing. Oh yeah, the Bible's flawed, but there is a God, and we know him. And there's the possibility that the Bible's flawed, and there's a God that nobody knows about.
Well, I didn't realize that actually. Like I said, I think I mentioned I bought a book about various religions. I've only gotten through the first chapter. But my thing is, the fact that so many people have written about a God all throughout the ages, it makes me think, hey, maybe there's something to this. Maybe
there is.
Maybe there is a God.
There is something to it. What is there to it?
I think when you look at evolutionary psychology, one of the things that tells you that it might be, at least in part genetically arrived at, whatever trait you're looking at, is that it arises independently across cultures that had no contact with one another. So, having a God serves social purposes. There's research looking at, God's God concepts helping societies to treat one another better, because if this God is always watching, you're gonna behave yourself. It helps people form war parties and attack the rival tribe. That has an advantage, at least evolutionarily. I mean, so, but
just look at what's the one thing all of them have in common? People. People trying to explain things, people trying to influence others, people trying to justify things that perhaps they can't justify. It's completely unsurprising to me. People are like, oh, well, but all these gods are kind of similar. Well, if you're trying to answer a question, you're going to come up with similar answers. And if you come up with completely dissimilar answers, those are never going to stick. They're not going to become popular. If you ask, why is the sky blue? And your first answer is that, well, there are these fairies that go up and paint the ceiling every night. And other people come up with much more plausible explanations. Your fairy explanation is not going to be that popular. But it's not surprising that in trying to answer a question, you come up with something which is sufficient to answer the question. The issue becomes, is it necessary and sufficient? Have we come across the right answer rather than one of many plausibles?
Yeah.
And forgive me, I may have misunderstood that. Do you think that's what I'm doing? Am I grasping at straws here?
No, I think you're learning and researching and asking questions, and the more you do of that, the more, hopefully, your positions will solidify on something that is reasonable. Because when you say, and I kind of sidetracked this, but when you say, what if the Bible's false and yet there is still a God? Then my reaction to that is immediately, okay, when is it time to believe that there is a God? As soon as there's evidence, not just because, oh, the Bible could be false and maybe there's a God. The time to believe that there is a God is when there's sufficient evidence to warrant belief. And so the Bible could be false, the Quran could be false, the Bhagavad Gita could be false. You just run through all of them, and then you're left with, okay, well, what's left? This is, at least in part, the process that I went through, which is when I realized I couldn't be a Christian, it became, what kind of God might there be? Rather than going through and exploring each religion individually, I took it back to a more philosophical level in the hopes that by answering the question about what kind of God might exist, it would direct my search towards whether any of the other religions were right.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that was your process, because my sister is convinced that I'm slowly becoming an atheist. I said, don't say that, don't say that. It's funny because I feel like, as much as this scares me to say, guys, I feel like I might be, but I'm not ready to let go of, I've discussed this on past shows, I don't want to think that I'm never going to see my grandpa or my fiance again. That hurts.
Yeah. Yeah.
It completely sucks.
I get it, but I'd like to not think, I'd like to believe that I'm going to be a billionaire next year, but I'm not. And so the fact that something is comforting is independent of whether it's true, and the fact that you might desire to believe something is independent of whether it's true as well.
Yeah.
It's that fear thing that Hector was talking about. It's powerful. fear, and
It is.
those things are really motivating factors because they're powerful.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, John, I'm sorry. I hope I'm not interrupting. I can't see you guys.
No, not at all. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so John, kind of expanding on that, I watched a video by the Thinking Atheist. And is it okay if I say what the video is?
Of course. Sure. Seth's only my best friend in the movement.
Oh, I love Seth Andrews. Good. Don't get me started on how pretty he is. Okay.
He's going to love that.
If I had a line open right now, I would conference him in.
Would you? Can you?
I don't have a line open. Go ahead.
Oh, my. Darn it. Okay, anyways. I watched a video called Burn Victims, and it really opened my eyes to the fact that a burning hell likely can't exist because hell doesn't seem to be compatible with a loving God. And anybody who has a fear of hell the way I do should go and watch that video, but be forewarned, it gets more and more graphic as you go.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, can I comment on something you said earlier, which may be a low-hanging fruit for you guys, but like you said, well, what if, forget the idea of hell, because you said, what if God is really a cool guy? What if all this talk of hell or whatever else that God is purported to have done is all false? But God is really a good guy. But what about disease? What about mental illness? What about birth defects? What about starvation and hunger and pain and cancer? What about that?
Yeah, basically,
not cool, God.
We're talking about what about the absence? So this notion that maybe there is a God and he's cool. Well. Let's imagine for a second that I'm God and I'm cool. What would the world be like? It's the book I'm writing is if I were God. And so one of the first things is, would we even be sitting here discussing whether or not there's a God? Because if I'm a God and I'm cool, the first thing I'm going to do is let everybody know, hey, I'm God and I'm cool. And now the argument's over. You can have other arguments. You can have other arguments about how cool I am, or hey, why am I not doing this or that? But at least there could be no argument that I exist. The least cool thing you could do is play the world's longest game of hide and go seek.
Yeah.
Instead, you have a bunch of mental gymnastics about why it's not good to question whether I exist or not.
Yeah, I mean, so imagine that the example I've used before is, what if I never met my parents, but there was always a note on the fridge written by somebody else telling me what my parents wanted me to do? Would it even be in the scope of reality that my parents actually loved me or cared about me or wanted me to know that they were real? Do I have any reason to think that they're real? If I was God and I saw all these other people out there saying, God said this, I'd be like, no, I fucking didn't. I didn't say that. How uncool is it for God to remain silent? It's like, it gets back to one of my favorite things from Traci Harris, where, there's somebody in a room who's molesting a child, and God sits back and says, you go ahead with that, I'll deal with you later. None of us would do that.
I know.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, God would tell the Westboro Baptist Church, no, I said I hate figs.
Yes. I would say that based on divine hiddenness, based on the problem of evil stuff that Hector was raising and other stuff, I think we can say conclusively that there is no God that is cool. There is no God that is caring, that wants to engage with people. That God is pretty much defeated just by a quick observation of the fact that there's a billion people who think that God has told them different things, and there's been no correction from God.
Just the volume of human suffering that is possible, and all the different kinds of anguishes we can experience.
Well, and you bring up cancer. I said that's what I lost my fiance to, and it would have been nice. Thank you. I appreciate that. It would have been nice to, if you're going to take the love of my life, at least give me something here, comfort me, something. But if I have time to jump into my much shorter second topic, is that okay?
Sure.
Well, thank you. What I wanted to expand on is kind of getting into the whole afterlife, since we're talking about this. A few years ago, I was actually on a reality TV show, and we went into this abandoned hospital. The thing is, I've said it before, I have OCD, and so we were facing our fears in this hospital. And it was crazy because there were 6 of us in a dark hallway, and I know what you're already thinking, but we get down this hallway, and something said, don't go any further. And I swear that all of us felt it. I cannot explain it. I don't know what it was, but it was weird.
Did you feel it? Did you feel it or hear it?
Felt it. It was just a feeling, really creepy. Nothing tapped me on the shoulder, nothing like that. But the fact that all of us felt it, and I remember a guy standing next to me saying, hey, let's turn around. I don't think there's anything good down there. Do you guys think that there's anything to the whole, I don't know if you want to call it ghosts or...
Well, I think there's the same thing to it as there is to the gods, and that's humans and human fears. It's not, you know, it's like when you hear about people describing their alien abduction scenario, we've moved on to a point now where pretty much all of them sound roughly the same. We're talking about grays, almond eyes, big head, you know, short, because that's what's entered culture. You go back many years prior to Close Encounters and other things like that, and you have all sorts of monsters, robot monsters, hairy monsters, octopus-type monsters. We narrowed in on something. This is what's entered the cultural zeitgeist. So we have the same thing with regard to horror movies, ghost stories, other stuff. It's not all that surprising that a few people in a strange place might get creeped out around the same time, especially if what happened with the lighting and the wind at that particular point mimicked something that people had seen in a film or had heard about in some other ghost story. You know, how many kids have been, young adults have been out parking in a car and making out, and all of a sudden there's a wonder whether or not there's a creepy guy with a hook on his hand getting ready to attack the car. I mean, thoughts like that go through our heads all the time, and so on some occasions it's going to hit us at once.
Yeah, some of this may boil down to our neurology. You know, there's this idea called that we have a hyperactive agency detection device. So our brains were really adapted to recognize other other minds, and whether or not, even if they're there, you know, we're always walking around the savannas wondering whether or not the enemy was in wait for us, laying traps, laying ambushes, and just understanding other people. Yeah. And so it's hyperactive in that we see faces in the clouds, we see Jesus figures in toast, we walk in a dark hallway and we sense an entity like if it's another thinking being. So that may be just an output of our brains in that respect.
I think people really influence each other too in a group. There's this you know, kind of mob psychology that goes on, and if something happens and you talk about it later, people will be influenced by what other people say they experienced, and so they kind of morph into a single narrative where if you had interviewed them separately, you might not have gotten the same story.
Exactly, and we'll lie when there's a threat of being the one outsider in the group. I remember one lie that I told very specifically. I was relatively young, probably 11, 12, something like that. And several of my friends and I were laying out on a trampoline looking up at the moon. And being at that age where some of our older friends were starting to experiment with drugs, but we were too young to do this, and you still want to be cool, at some point somebody's like, wow, the moon looks like it's moving. And then all of the rest of us were like, oh, yeah, it is. And we started describing the movement. We basically converged on a story, which I know for me was not true. And that made me wonder if it was true for anybody else.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there was even a diagnosis, I think, in past iterations of the DSM, the diagnostic manual we used to diagnose psychiatric conditions, called shared delusional disorder. So people can share delusions in a pathological way, and certainly in religion. And certainly in something as simple as thinking the moon is moving in a way that it's not.
I think that ties into what we were talking about earlier with Alpha God, and that is that this is a plausible explanation for how we got these religious ideas. The shared delusion is another plausible explanation for some of them. At no point, or I will try to speak for all of us and willing to be corrected, at no point are any of us saying, yep, this is the explanation. It's definitely a shared delusion, or it's definitely this part of our psychology, or it's this. But when you recognize that these are potential plausible explanations, if you were going back to a call on Talk Heathen earlier where this guy wanted to dip into Bayesian analysis, at a minimum, while I think it's difficult to put probability calculations on various God claims, without doing any calculation, I'd have to say that it's almost, it'd have to be more plausible that these are human inventions coming out of our psyche than that there is a God, in part because of what we already addressed about if there was a cool God, he would have already explained this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And often there's a confluence of factors. Often it's not just one or the other. I mean, human psychology is so complex. It's, you know, there's a confluence of factors influencing why we do a certain thing or have a certain love or a certain disdain or a God.
Yeah, and going back to the fact that I lied on that trampoline about what I saw with the moon, that doesn't mean the first person was lying. They could have been having some sort of aberrant psychological experience. They could have been on drugs and I didn't know it. So that doesn't explain where the origin of this story does, but it does explain the popularity of the story and how we converge on things. Because, you know, while some of us are a little more comfortable bucking the status quo than others, by and large, humans fit into that. I'd really rather not be ostracized from the bucket I'm in just yet. I'm going to bide my time, and then I will make a run for it.
That's huge. Yeah.
Well,
anyway,
guys, I really appreciate it. Yeah, I know you have other callers, so what I'll do is I'll call back another week with some scary stories for you to debunk.
Okay.
Okay.
And before you go to all that effort, the fact that I can't debunk them doesn't mean they're true.
Okay, darn it. Okay, yeah, that's cool.
Cool. Thanks, Tracy. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye, Tracy. Something Tracy brought to mind another question that I had because you know, she brought up every culture has kind of had a God idea that we know of, and almost, and that even ones that weren't influenced by each other.
Yeah.
And being that we're primates, despite our best attempts to kind of pretend we're not or something different, the primates have an alpha male, but as best as we can tell, they don't really have this alpha supernatural male that you know, that is above the real males of the group. What is it about humans that made them need to invent that higher alpha?
You know, I saw something that may not directly answer your question, but I thought was really fascinating. So when robust chimpanzees show dominance or trying to show dominance to one another, you know, they engage in what? Piloerection. They make their fur fluff out, and they do all these dominance displays. I remember seeing footage of a chimpanzee doing that to a thunderstorm. He heard the thunderstorm, and he imputes what he knows into the thunderstorm. We do that. So this is a dominant male that I'm fighting for dominance with, and he displays in front of this thunderstorm. I've seen one do that in front of a waterfall. Okay. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think we need explanations for things because of our large cerebral cortex. I mean, we want to make sense of things. It makes us feel uncomfortable if we don't have explanation for things. That's probably part of it.
Yeah, I think you know, the way you phrased the question was what makes humans need to do that. And I'd argue that perhaps it's not a need so much as a capacity. So another great ape bristling at a thunderstorm demonstrates something along those lines, but they may not have the cognitive capacity to conceptualize that as maybe as an agent, but maybe not as an actual agent to the same extent that we would. So it could be a difference. And also language is a huge factor in this, and because if you have a concept, it could be that there's 100 apes out there now who have a God concept. They just can't relay it to somebody else so that it can be solidified.
Right. Interesting thought experiment. Yeah.
Certainly, you know, dolphins could. But there's also another thing, and that is when other apes come into contact with us, are we perceived by them as apes, as alpha ape? Are we godlike to them? And maybe it's the case that because we don't necessarily have. Now I realize that humans and apes aren't always interacting, so I'm kind of playing around here a little bit. But we have this monumental arrogance that we are the top dog on the planet because we tend to prioritize cognitive abilities, and as far as we can tell, we got it beat. We are the top of the heap in that area. Maybe there are other creatures who would do similarly, but under different categories. And so if, an ape runs into a human, are we godlike or are we just another ape that they can't completely comprehend? Which I know just gave some theist ammunition to call in to say, well, God is just something you can't comprehend. But the point is, that ape would have no justification for believing that I was a god, thinking I was a god, or trying to convince anybody else that I was a god, especially if it can't understand me. How can you take a concept and say, oh, you can't understand it, but here, let me tell you about it?
But he definitely might say you're an alpha. I mean, the point is we use the hardware that we know. We use it to understand other beings. I mean, the dog whisperer, Cesar Millan. I mean, that was his whole shtick. He's like, establish yourself as the alpha, and your dog will follow suit. And there's some truth to that. Zoologists talk about why were we never able to domesticate zebras? Why were we not able to domesticate giraffes? Because they didn't live in hierarchically organized groups. The animals we were able to dominate have that structure, so their brains have adapted to recognize somebody in the dominance hierarchy. And religions have done that to us.
Oh, and I'm going to push back for fun. So there's a really cool wildlife park you can go to not too far outside, and you can hop on a trailer and have a big bucket of food, and they have giraffes along with a bunch of other animals that are not domesticated, and yet those things have trained themselves to walk right up to the cart and take the food and everything else. Maybe the reason we haven't domesticated giraffes is because we haven't spent as much time trying to do that. Maybe we could all have pet giraffes if we wanted to.
They might be friendly and eat carrots out of your hand, but will they fetch the paper? Will they do things like that? Will they show submission?
Well, my
to
pet
you?
Snake and my pet fish won't fetch the paper either. But
have you tried?
Well, the fish did not make it very far. The snake did get out by the mailbox, but couldn't work the key. Yeah.
The fish probably didn't follow you around either.
No, I tried it on a leash, but it just kind of hung there.
Yeah.
All the animal rights activists that are getting ready to email, I'm obviously joking. We've got Nick in Madison. Thanks for waiting around with Matt, John, and Hector. Oh, now you're actually on. Sorry, Nick.
Okay, no problem. How you doing?
Hey, Nick.
Doing well.
Hey, good. Like I told the call screener, I've been religious most of my life. I've been having questions lately. I'm 41 years old. The biggest thing that I can't get past is the first cause that Thomas Aquinas put forth. I know you've talked about this on the show before. I know. But I'm just trying to get past that. I can't get past that.
Okay. So let's assume for just a second that there must have been a first cause. I'll just grant the argument that concludes, therefore, there must have been a cause. What do we know about that cause?
You don't know anything about it.
Yeah. So you don't even know whether it's an agent or a god. So the first cause argument couldn't possibly be the thing that keeps somebody believing in God, because the first cause argument doesn't argue for a god necessarily.
Because we're already here.
It's just that basically we reach the answer, hey, we don't know what started it all off, or even if that's the right way to do it, but people have been proposing a god. And so this god became, just by sheer weight of popularity, a seemingly plausible explanation that's not actually plausible. So if you acknowledge that even if there's a first cause, you don't know anything about it, that can't be the thing that keeps you believing in God, because it doesn't get you there.
Well, okay, and again, like I said, I'm not trying to argue. I'm just trying to talk.
Either works for me.
Okay. And first of all, I love the show. You guys are great.
Thank you.
But when you say you can't get there, although now that I think about it, I'm thinking about, you know, what I have done research, and I've read about particle physics where things just pop in and out of existence, you know?
Okay.
So something can come from nothing.
I'm not aware of any nothing that we could actually use to demonstrate that with. I'm not aware that there ever has been or could be a nothing. And by the way, even saying a nothing makes it something. So what physicists are talking about when you listen to somebody like Lawrence Krauss or whoever talking about a universe from nothing, they're not talking about nothing in the same context that philosophers would talk about nothing. They're talking about a quantum state where there's zero effective energy across the system type of thing. What they're talking about is a something. Although I know Lawrence would argue with me on that, but it's definitely not the same thing as, you know, the ex nihilo nothing from philosophy.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's exactly what I'm talking about,
but this is the thing, is that it doesn't matter. It didn't even, it wouldn't matter if we'd proved that, let's say, something could come from nothing, or if we just had physics models that seem to imply that something could come from the thing that we would typically kind of colloquially refer to as nothing. None of that matters, because at the end of the day, even when we didn't know any of that, the correct answer to why is there something rather than nothing is, I don't know. And what's happening is, as Hector was pointing out earlier, is that that answer is so uncomfortable for people that we have come up with explanations, and some of them have gotten quite popular, and yet none of them have any justification for believing that they're the right answer. It's just, we didn't have a way to investigate this. We got really tired and frustrated at having to say, gosh, I don't know why there's something. It must be God. And that's not the way reason works. That's an incredibly unsound epistemology to say, well, we're so smart and we've done so much research that we should really know this by now. And the fact that we don't know this by now really amplifies my discomfort at not knowing, so I'm going to go with God.
And I completely understand that. Like, you know, the argument from incredulity where, you know, I don't see how this happened. God did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be that, but
I'm not remotely implying that me stating this is going to make you go, oh, of course I was so silly. Of course I don't. But it is something to think about, and the most important thing is, I would guess, because this is typical of almost everybody that I talk to in this realm, is that you have the same discomfort with acknowledging that you don't know the answer, and that takes work to get comfortable saying I don't know. And for me, it's one of the best things you can possibly say, because if you pretend like you know when you don't, then you stop looking for the right answer, and you have no hope of ever getting. Why would you keep looking for the right answer if you think you already have it? And so the second you acknowledge you don't know what the answer is, that allows you to go out and keep exploring.
And I completely understand that, because, you know, I grew up, and I'm not going to disparage my parents because they're great people. I mean, just awesome people. But I grew up, you know, believing that the world was 6,000 years old. And then I went to college, then I joined the Marines, and I learned that, no, it's not.
It is. It's just older.
5 billion years old.
Yes, it's just at least 6,000 years old.
It's a lot older than that.
Yep. I'm sorry. I would joke while you were being serious. My fault.
No, okay, sorry. No, I grew up believing that, and then I learned something different, just on my own, by researching, on my own.
Yeah, the thing that you have to exercise caution about is you believed one thing until you were convinced of a better answer. And so what a lot of people are doing with, you know, the God thing is they believe it, they become convinced of it for bad reasons, the same way all of us did, but they're reluctant to give it up until there's a better answer. And for these big questions where we don't necessarily have a better answer, that becomes a sticking point. It's not so much, it's not even truly a fallacy. It's something that we normatively do. I'm convinced that that Hector's a good guy. Now, we don't know each other all that well, but the interactions that I've had with him have been positive. I would need somebody to show me that he's not a good guy in order for me to change my mind. That's the way we generally think of like a burden of proof or a burden of evidence is I'm going to stick with what I already...
Kevin, I believe you're a good guy too, without evidence.
I can prove that wrong really quick.
But I'm just assuming.
No, the point is that if, in most cases, if you believe something and then you're shown to be wrong because you got the right answer or a better answer, that's how we change our mind. What we have to do is become comfortable with the notion that just because we have an answer and we don't have a better one does not mean that we were right to accept the first answer. As a matter of fact, probability alone would suggest that you were almost certainly wrong to accept the first answer that you were presented.
Actually, would you say then maybe, we're not right to accept the second answer? We still have to look.
Well, that's the thing is that all the things that we discover, I'm not absolutely certain about anything. Every position I have is tentative based on newer, better evidence.
Nor am I anymore.
And it's, it's probability based. And my confidence level, a la Hume, I try to make proportional to the evidence that supports an idea. So my confidence level that there's a God is pretty much zero.
Yeah. Sometimes I hear these arguments and I just wonder if the concern is not an evidential one, if it's an emotional one. How much do people get stuck on this? Well, but we can't really explain the origins of the universe yet. How much is that really intellectual versus, okay, if I really embrace this, it means that I'm going back into the earth forever. And there's no purpose to this, and that's really terrifying. That's really getting people stuck on that question.
And that's actually something else that you can show to be highly improbable. So yes, I'm worried about the potential of not having an explanation for this, et cetera. But if we, in much the same way that the first cause argument doesn't necessarily get you to a God you know anything about, even if you went with it just because it's comforting, just because it makes you feel less anxious about not knowing what the answer is, or if you're doing what Hector was talking about, which was this may get me other things as well. And the problem is that you've begun with something that's flawed, and now you're about to slide down a slippery slope into maybe not all the way to fundamentalist, conservative stuff, but you're going to end up believing a bunch of other things that are potentially flawed. And to do that after you've acknowledged that even if the first cause got us to a God, you know nothing about that God's characteristics. So now you're in a position where you believe in a God, but you don't know what it's like, you don't know what it wants, you don't know whether or not it can benefit you, whether or not it will benefit you. So it's kind of just, I'm going to cling to this in the hopes that maybe it can benefit me. And that's kind of like hanging on to not just a lottery ticket after the drawing that didn't win, but hang on to a fake lottery ticket after the drawing that did win.
No, I understand that, and I don't want to keep you guys, too long because I know you have a limited amount of time. But what I'm saying is, I'm having these feelings, I'm having these thoughts, and I'm thinking about these things, and basically everything that I was brought up to believe is wrong.
Welcome to the club.
That's a big deal.
Yeah,
okay?
Yeah, it is.
I mean,
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't mean to be glib.
It's frightening.
It was not like one day I woke up and said, wow, all that stuff's wrong and I feel so much better. Ultimately, I did feel a lot better. I have more freedom. I have more confidence in what I believe. But it's never or almost never a trivial thing. And for some people, it's much more difficult than others.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And also, I haven't, I know, Matt, you came out to your family as an atheist. That's fine. I haven't come out to my family at all. And I don't know when I will because, let's be honest, my parents are old. I have this much time with them.
Yep.
I want to make my time with them happy.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's no reason to tell them that.
And that's why most of the time, even though they know, most of the time I don't talk religion with my parents. I did on this last trip home for like 6 hours. As soon as I got there, I got to my mom's house at 4:30. She fed me, and at 5:30 we started talking and didn't stop till like 11:30. But that's the only time that we've had that conversation. And there were good things that came out of it, and there were not so good things that came out of it. It was the first day of the week that I spent there, and all the rest of the week was fine. Because, you know, yeah, they think I'm, you know, actively working for Satan and out to destroy God's wonderful plan. But they love me.
I don't think my mom and dad would never think that. I mean, they would just, you know, think that I needed to be, you know, guided somewhere else, basically.
Right. Right. You just don't want to cause them distress in their last days by coming out to them, right?
Yeah.
Basically, I mean, yeah. I mean, they're in their 70s. I mean, come on. Why would I want to do that?
I'll tell you something that I wasn't really going to talk about, and I'll keep this brief.
Okay.
I have one remaining grandparent. She's 91. And without getting into the specifics, something was said about whether or not I was going to be coming back to Jesus and how she had hoped that she would see that before her time on earth is over.
Okay.
I don't like to lie. I think there are often good times to lie. I don't know for sure if my grandmother was, I mean, she's fine. We had a good time. We played cards. But if she was actually on her deathbed and desperately wanted to know that I had come back to Jesus before she was, you know, moving on to meet him in person, I don't know if I would lie or not. I would like to think that I wouldn't lie. On the other hand, I don't know that I have any real objection to doing it.
Well, I'll tell you right now that, you know, in that case, you know, in that scenario, I would flat out lie.
Yeah, it's something I considered. I can't say until I'm in the situation.
When she died, you know?
Yeah, I get it.
But you bring up an interesting point. People live long. You may have to hold that secret for 20 odd years. That's burdensome as well.
Not only that, what about all the people who are younger than you who care about you who are bothered by this as well?
Right.
So you're going to...
I know, and that's...
Right.
Like,
that's a great point. It's not only about the older generations.
It's not just the older generations. You know, I have, you know, nieces. I have brother and sister-in-law who I love to death. I love them all to death. They all go to a evangelist church. Which is great. It's fine. They love it. I mean, it's great for them. But I just don't believe it. And I don't want to... They're their kids. Yeah. I don't want to get in the way of their kids, you know?
Everybody knows about me. My niece and my nephew know about me and have. And I told my brother early on, I'm always going to be honest with them. And if they ask questions or if I give answers that are uncomfortable or what you don't like, I'm always going to finish the conversation with, but there are many views on this. You should go talk to your dad and you should think for yourself. Yeah. Basically, you're describing... Nick, you're describing that you're a decent human being who cares about others.
Yeah, but you never know. You never know how many young people may be agonizing over the same things that you're agonizing over, and you come out like, oh my gosh, thank you, Uncle, for saying this, you know, because I was thinking this too. I've had that experience.
Thought myself. I was the only one in the whole family who felt like this, and now I have somebody I can talk to at, you know, Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah.
I mean, they're like, you know, 7 and 5 right now, but you know, maybe later, you know, many years later, you know, we can talk about this. But
it's a quandary, and I wouldn't fault you for.
I'm not getting it unless they bring it up. I'm not bringing it up.
But there's no requirement that you have to broadcast your doubts to the world just because you have them. You know, you can be judicious in what you reveal to who and when. So, you know, at the end of the day, it's what you're comfortable presenting yourself as, and you have to kind of keep that balance.
But yeah, as you run into more, you know, difficulties or questions, by all means, you can call us back. You can call Talk Heathen. You can call shows, but also look for some people in your community that, you know, have gone through similar things. There's plenty of organizations out there where you can at least interact at some level that you're comfortable with people who have also have either found their way out of religion or in the process of doing so or expressing doubts. And some of them are going to have much better thoughts and advice than any of us are going to have, because they're going to be in a situation that's potentially more similar to yours than ours was.
No, absolutely, and I appreciate that. And Matt, I appreciate that in this whole call you didn't say no, 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 no.
Okay. Gosh, that's tempting. I will resist the temptation. Thanks a lot for the call, Nick.
All right, thanks a lot. Have a good day.
You too.
I haven't heard you say that in a long time.
I think Julie keeps it going more than I do on Facebook, but it's, yeah, it's, well, I'm not going to go into the thought processes behind how and why I make the decisions, because I'm not going to pretend to know myself quite that well. It just, I think that what ends up happening on the show a lot is you're going to get different calls. And I try to make sure that people get as good as they give. And so if somebody's willing to have a conversation and you can maintain calm, well, then, you know, it's like I smoked a bowl before the show. And if they're a little bit more dishonest in conversation, well, then, you know, somebody once called me Bill O'Reilly on PCP. I'm not sure which show they were watching, because I don't think I've quite ever been.
Wow.
Yeah, that phrase stuck with me. It was kind of amusing. But, okay, we're going to take Frode in Norway. Thanks for waiting. You're on with Matt, John, and Hector.
Hello. I'm your biggest fan from Norway, Matt. Just to say that.
Awesome.
You have a big fan in Norway. I'm scared to my pants to call in right now, so please be careful. And my dad is listening.
I'm not even wearing pants, so you're fine. That's a lie.
I wanted to talk about slavery in the Bible. It's one of the topics that you have covered many times.
Too many times.
Would you like to give me a little overview of what your view is on slavery?
Yeah, it's wrong. It's wrong to own people as property. It's wrong to use it as an excuse to mistreat people. Exodus 21 goes into great detail about who you should enslave, where you should buy them from the heathen that surround you, how you treat your Jewish slaves differently from your other slaves, how the slaves are your property that you can pass on to your kids, how you can beat them with, you know, as long as they don't die within a day or two. It's one of the most ridiculously, obviously false and bad things in the Bible, and I really, really love watching Christians and Jews try to jump through hoops to make it seem like this is okay. And honestly, the best Ray Comfort may have given one of the best answers, which was, I don't believe everything in the Bible's true, which was really funny coming from him in particular. But I once had at a debate in Dallas, there were 4 Christians standing around me, and I brought up the slavery issue, and they all 4 of them had different answers. So I told them to argue amongst themselves, and when they agreed on it, they could come back and talk to me again.
Is there anything in the Bible, in your view, other than slavery, that is very clearly unmoral?
Yes, the Old Testament.
And I'll argue the New makes some things worse, because at least when you died, you know, the Jews' view in afterlife was that you slept with your fathers. The New Testament introduces the immorality of infinite torment and torture, potentially, depending on your view of hell, for finite crime.
Yeah. So many people don't know about the content of the Old Testament. I mean, God tells Moses, ostensibly, who commands his men, go into the rival tribes, slaughter all the men, slaughter all the boy children, and take the girls for yourself for sexual
The virgin
slaves.
girls.
The virgin girls for yourself.
It's like, how did you figure out which ones were virgins and which ones weren't?
Probably they were like 9. That's probably how. Over and over and over you hear.
So like Muhammad's wife.
Yeah, absolutely. So infanticide, genocide.
Just the disparity in how men and women are. I did it. Actually, if you go to my Patreon project, patreon.com/atheist debates, not only is there a video up there that goes through slavery, verse by verse, both from Leviticus and Deuteronomy, et cetera, but also there's a video I put up on women's worth in the Bible, because when it lists, for example, expressly how much you're supposed to pay for male and female slaves, the females are worth less. There's differences in who can actually own or inherit property. There's differences in, I don't know, everything, whether or not they are, there's men with multiple wives and then a whole bunch of concubines and handmaidens. There's not the reverse. And while, you could talk about the potential lesbianism of Ruth, and the Bible is slightly softer on two women getting jiggy with it than it is with two men getting jiggy with it. But by and large,
doesn't mention women at all, right?
Paul does.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a brief thing. But by and large, the very notion, it's not just that women were like an inferior part of everything in God's view, but then you have the added thing that everybody who wasn't a Jew was already, on God's shit list from the beginning. It's like, you're my chosen people, and of my chosen people, the guys are way more important than the girls. Yeah. It's,
my dad is asking me one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, Matt.
Okay.
Is there any morality from the Bible that you can look at from a secular point and say is a good moral?
Sure. There's lots of stuff. And if right now Iron Chariots is down, and we need to work to resolve that. My apologies for people who've used it as a reference. It's a counter-apologetics wiki that Russell and I created years ago and added to it. But I went through the Sermon on the Mount. I wish I could direct you to that now. I can't. But I did a verse-by-verse deconstruction of the Sermon on the Mount, and I pointed out what verses were good, what verses were bad, and which ones were indifferent, because I got tired of even atheists. I mean, I remember Richard Dawkins talking about the Sermon on the Mount and saying, it's one of the greatest things anybody's ever said. And I'm like, Richard, have you read it and thought about it? Because what it does is it creates a victim mentality that you're going to be persecuted because you're a sincere believer. And it gives this notion that people take away, which is, I'm being persecuted, which must mean I'm good. And it could just be that you're a dick. But when you look at it, not only does it create victim mentality, it creates this notion of subservience. It instantiates this notion of infinite, potentially torture for finite crimes. But it's not, even the golden rule is not expressed very well by Jesus.
Oh, boy. If I may add to what you're saying, I mean, this kind of goes back into how we evolved as small-knit tribes of maybe topping out at 150 hunter-gatherers that were close-knit, inward-focused. Everybody else was the enemy. You conducted raids on those tribes. You slaughtered them. You took the women. So yeah, there are good bits of moral edicts in the Bible, but they fall away at the periphery of the tribe. Case in point, one of the first things that Moses did when he came down the mount with the tablet saying, "Thou shalt not kill," you know what the first thing was? Slaughter the rival tribe. He orders men to kill 3,000 of the rival tribe because they were practicing a foreign religion. So it didn't mean thou shalt not kill. It just meant thou shalt not kill those of your own race. It has a military value. To
That's
be
also
insular.
the second time he came down with those tablets, by the way, according to the book. It's funny because there are I think religious people can be potentially as good as non-religious people, maybe. But even when you're talking about something that I would view as good, like forgiveness, the Bible gets the how and the why wrong. This notion that you should, forgive each other, it's because God wants you to. No, the reason to forgive something has nothing to do with whether or not a God wants you to or not, and it has very little to do with them. If Hector wrongs me in some way, the best reason that I can come up with to truly forgive him is for my benefit, because I'm carrying around this baggage of being hurt by somebody. He's not carrying that baggage around. And if I forgive him, he's definitely not carrying that baggage around. But if I forgive him, I can let go of it. And now what somebody else has done to me is no longer dominating and controlling my life. It's not even... The Bible is not even kindergarten level theology, philosophy, or morality. It is exactly what we would expect from a bunch of people ages ago who were trying to come up with the best answers and explanations for stuff they didn't really know about. And it's preposterous to think that we haven't learned and gotten better in the intervening years. We clearly have. And I would say that the graduation point currently is something like secular humanism.
One of my dad's arguments, and I'm sorry that I'm talking on his behalf because he doesn't want to call in, is that it was necessary at the point to have slaves.
Why?
In the Bible.
That's bullshit.
Yeah,
it's bullshit. So read through in the same book in Exodus, where God's going through and sanctioning slavery and telling you what you can and can't do, and who you can own and everything else. That's the same book where he doesn't allow you to eat shellfish or to wear fabrics of mixed fibers. What kind of weak-ass God do people believe in that he can say, don't eat shellfish, but gosh, you really still need those slaves for a while. I'll fix that problem later. How hard would it be? He's God. Thou shalt not own another human being as property. Done. Boom. How hard was that? Oh, and what if the people weren't ready for it? Tough. They weren't ready for any of the other 617 commandments. Maybe some of them they were ready for, but the notion that God had to be gentle with this ancient society because he didn't want to disrupt their, they thought slavery was right, and I don't want to really push them to. That's not the character of the God of the Old or the New Testament. The God of the Old Testament is, I'm a jealous God. I am the Lord thy God. You shall have no other gods before me. Here's the shit you're going to do, and here's what you're not going to do. And only time I'm going to mince words is to soften on slavery. And oh, by the way, he gets it exactly backwards. Not just... He could have not included any message at all about slavery and then corrected it later. But not only does he include a message, he gets it completely wrong that you can own people. And then what happens in the Christian Bible when Jesus comes around? One of the first things Jesus should have done was say, hey, you know that stuff that they wrote down about slavery? That's wrong. I'm not quite sure where they got that or why or whatever, but let's fix that now. But that's not what Jesus does. And it's not what Paul does. Slaves, obey your masters in the Lord, for this is good, especially the cruel ones. And the only thing moral you can say, and I've said this, 100 times now, to a slave, is not to obey your master, even the cruel ones. It's to get yourself and anybody else who's enslaved out of that situation. That's the commandment.
Yeah, no, I got him to look at the talk that you were talking about that you have on slaves, and his only argument was that from a social standpoint, at that time, it wasn't unmoral at that time to have slaves.
I agree with him that
I'm not sure if that.
I agree with him that people at that time did not necessarily understand that it was immoral, but you know how they could have found out real quick? They could have asked the slaves. But the problem is it starts with this us and them mentality, and whatever we do to you is fine. So even though the slaves are upset about being slaves, it doesn't matter because they're already in that inferior class.
Yeah. That's it. It's that insular morality. I mean, thou shalt not steal. How many biblical patriarchs conducted raids on the rival tribe and took all their goods? It's insular.
Yeah, and it's for me that has to be common. It's something different, but and that's one of the reasons why he promised to listen to the show today and is sending me messages about this. It's because his biggest argument is that it was at the time necessary, and he feels like it's not a strong enough argument that it's unmoral in the views of modern men.
Well, all right, so let me repeat something that I did at a debate in San Antonio, and my apologies to people who've already heard this 20 times. I could write a book that's better than the Bible, and I can prove it to your dad right now, which is I could rewrite the Bible word for word, remove its advocacy for slavery, and the Bible would be a better book. That's an undeniable fact. Now, how is it that I can sit here and write a book that is better than the moral guiding compass, all-powerful God of the universe? That's how you know it's bullshit.
Well, I thank you so much for taking my call, Matt. Again,
Sure.
I'm your biggest fan from Norway, and thanks for not biting my head off.
Hopefully I'll get up to Norway one of these days, but I appreciate the call, and I appreciate the fact that your dad was willing to listen too. Whether he changes his mind or not, the willingness to listen is probably the thing we're most looking for, I would say.
Yeah, yeah.
Appreciate your time.
It's definitely... Thank you. Bye.
And I didn't want, because he called in twice from Norway, and I didn't want to keep him too long. I don't know. I looked through the index real quick in Alpha God because I was specifically looking to see whether or not you addressed.
I talked about it.
Yeah, but it wasn't in the index. So
yeah,
how did you hit on it in here with regard to our tribal mentality?
Oh, just that you know, it's a way to conquer. It's a way to serve the tribe's interest. I mean, I write a lot about the Spanish conquest of the Americas. I mean, you know, how it went down is you had the Spanish kind of riding in, clanging in their armor, saying, you know, this is the new God. He's the more powerful male than your gods, toppling all the religious shrines and literally building cathedrals out of their ruins. You know, that territorial marker that is set in place. But it was always that I represent this God. So as you bow down to him, as you kneel to him, really you're kneeling to me because I have this special alliance with him. So you know, native people across all the Americas were enslaved. Give me your goods, give me your women, give me your gold. That's what this God wants. So it serves the tribe. It serves the chosen tribe. It's a way to dominate other people.
Yeah, slavery in the short term is incredibly profitable and beneficial to the slave owners.
It's effective. It's just
in the long
moral.
term, it's even bad for them, which is something that we've learned over time.
Yeah.
It's just, why would a God need to learn that? Why wouldn't that? And you know, it's not like I was asking in the Bible for God to, you know, prove Fermat's last theorem or teach us, you know, details about neurology. This is something simple of whether or not it is morally permissible to have other people as property.
Yeah, motivated reasoning is so strong. People will try and reason that away. I've heard people talk about the infanticide, relatives of mine talk about the infanticide in the Bible. Well, you know, they must have been bad people. Well, the children, the infants, I mean...
Oh, they were terrible.
That kind of goes against your anti-abortion stance, right? You know, but they must have would have grown up to be bad people. It just goes on and on and on and on.
Yeah, God knew they would be, you know, plus they have a motivation for vengeance. Hey, you killed off everybody in my tribe, and when I grow up, I'm going to take it out on you.
Right.
Well, yeah, that's a completely practical reason that has nothing to do with the morality of the situation or whether or not there's a God commanding it.
Yeah.
But it's that cognitive dissonance you mentioned earlier that, you know, I don't want to speak for Frode's dad, but he knows on some level that slavery's wrong, so he has to make an argument that it was different in order to be, you know, okay with that.
Those four guys that were standing there arguing amongst themselves, one of them argued that it used to be moral, but now it's not. Kind of the way they do with incest.
Right.
It used to be moral, but now it's not. Another one argued that it was still moral under as it's described in the Bible, it was moral and would be moral now. Another one was arguing that it wasn't slavery, it was indentured servitude, but I've already gone down that road a bunch of times. And the fourth one, I don't remember how weird it was, but as soon as I realized there were several who disagreed, I'm like, okay, you guys sort it out. When you come up with what the Christian answer is, I'll address that one.
Did they ever?
No.
Not surprised.
There can be no consensus when there are over 1,000 denominations that all identify as Christian, point to the same book, and get seemingly everything wrong.
Yeah.
But all right, we've got Ron in Canada. Thanks for waiting. You're on with Matt, John, and Hector.
Wow, thank you so much for taking my call.
You're welcome. What do you got for us?
Well, you know, this is my first time calling, a short-time listener, and I've heard a lot of arguments put forth by my fellow theists, and I'm a little bit disappointed to say that often the arguments are not that great or sound or valid. And I
I'm disappointed as well.
Context a little bit and see what you have to say.
Okay.
So I don't know why most theists that call in seem to want to defend the existence of God or to find proof for the existence of God. You know, going through any of the arguments that you guys have, I don't believe it's the most important question to be asking.
Well, if somebody's a theist, so that one of the things of the show is tell me what you believe and why. And so if you're a theist, then that means you believe in a God. And so it's completely unsurprising that
I do believe in a God, but I think it's more important to make the case for the existence of God than, it's less important to make the case for the existence of God than it is to make the case for how important God is.
Why would it be? Is it more important to demonstrate that Bigfoot exists than it is to show how important Bigfoot would be to my life if he did exist?
Yes.
No.
Yes. Bigfoot is meaningless to your life.
Because until you demonstrate that Bigfoot exists, it doesn't make any difference how important he'd be to my life if he existed.
But I think that's putting the cart ahead of the horse. If I were to say, look, you know that your friends sitting next to you exist, or let's say your neighbor sitting, living next to you exists, okay, but it doesn't really matter to you because you don't trust in him. He exists. It's like saying, there may have been a third baseman who played for the St. Louis Cardinals in 1927, but although he was maybe loved by his significant others and may have been important to them, he really had no significance in the history of baseball. So he's kind of meaningless. It's meaningless to even talk about his existence.
I think you're missing one thing here. So let's say that I agreed with you that if God exists, this would be an incredibly important and significant thing to my life. Now, what's the next question we have to address?
If God exists?
Yes, because if he doesn't, then all that time we spent talking about how important God would be in my life if he existed was time wasted. The first thing you have to do is demonstrate existence.
I don't think it's necessarily valuable or there's any value to proving. I don't even think it's possible to prove the existence of God.
Then you're admitting that you cannot have a good reason for believing that God exists.
I have good reasons. I don't have proof.
If you
I do have good reasons. I believe I see reasons in areas you don't see reasons.
Stop.
I don't have in his existence. And I don't believe his existence falls within the empirical world of proof evidence that you would want in your natural inclined thinking. Okay. Sorry.
I know sometimes the phone thing, it doesn't do crosstalk, so there's probably a lot that you didn't hear where I was trying to pause you there.
Oh, sorry. No, I did not.
Yeah,
sorry.
I understand. The audience laughs, but I'm used to this. So the thing is, if there is no God, then can we agree that it has zero significance to my life?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So.
Yes, but you have as much reason to not believe in a God as I have to believe in a God.
Okay. Now you're setting. No, stop.
We can't.
Stop.
Okay. Yes.
The burden of proof is on the individual who claims that there is a God. My position is I am not convinced there is a God. You must convince me that there is a God before I will.
I don't believe my purpose is to convince you is that there is a God. I don't even think that is the purpose to believe in, to force us to believe in a God.
That's not forcing. No. Demonstrating that something is real is not forcing in any sense other than a reasonable person would be compelled to accept.
Because
oh my God.
Absolutely. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I can absolutely believe that a God exists and still refuse to worship it or anything else. That's independent. Okay?
It is.
So I'm not convinced there is a God. You are convinced that there is a God. And all I'm looking for is, what is your reason for being convinced there is God? Because if your reason is, hang on, if your reason is valid and sound, then I will agree with you. But if it's not, then I cannot. And that doesn't mean, when you set up this, you have just as much reason to believe there's not a God than I do to believe there is. It doesn't matter. My position is not there is no God. My position is I am not convinced there is a God. Now, in some cases, I may go further to that. But at the end of the day, if you believe there's a God, I want to know why. And that's all I want to know first, because telling me how important this God is or how valuable it is completely secondary to whether or not it exists. Otherwise, we're wasting time.
Well, but it doesn't really matter why I tell you that my reasons for believing in God. I recognize my...
Yeah, I have zero patience for bullshit like that. If you want to say that, oh, well, I don't think this is anything I can demonstrate. okay, then you're admitting that you don't have a good reason yourself. Because if you have a good reason, you present that good reason. That's the way reasoning goes. If I tell you that I have good reason to think that Hector talked about slavery in this book, even though I didn't find it in the index, my good reason is that I have confidence that when he tells me he discussed it, he knows because he wrote the damn book. Now, am I exercising faith? Okay, maybe in some context, but my confidence level is proportional to the evidence. But if I said to Hector, please demonstrate to me that you actually did talk about slavery in this book, he could pick up the book and open up and show where he does. And now his reason for believing that he did is a reason that can be shared by me. Name, and I know I've hung up on you, so now you can't answer, but you can think about this and maybe send an email. What other things do we believe where when somebody asks us, why do we believe it? We say, well, I don't think I can prove it. Well, I don't have a good reason. Oh, I have reasons, but you're not going to accept that they're good reasons before the conversation's even taken place. This is preposterous. To say that it's more important, the value of a potential God. What you're admitting there is that you care more about comfort than truth.
Yeah, from an argumentation standpoint, it doesn't make sense. As a shrink, I was kind of interested in hearing, like, well, what are your reasons for it? Because I think it is more, you know, on the emotional side rather than the evidential
I wanted
side.
his reasons for it, not the reasons for why he thinks it's important.
Yeah.
Because if Voldemort exists, that's an important thing to know, because that can impact your life.
Yeah.
But if he doesn't exist, then all that time you spent studying on how to defeat Voldemort was a complete waste of time that you could have spent dealing with real problems in the real world.
Yeah.
Well, you know, and if you just say, I believe it, and you know, I don't really want to share my reasons with you, then the conversation is kind of done.
Yeah,
you know,
you
there's
called
no
the wrong
point.
show.
Because, okay, you fine, go off and believe it, and, you know, we'll
Tell
go
me
on to
what
the
you
next
believe.
caller. Yeah.
Tell me what you believe, why you believe it, and why you think somebody else should. If you're not calling for that reason, you know, call another show. But
yeah.
All right, on that note, we got Josh, who's in Denver, Colorado, and has been waiting for a while. Thanks for waiting, Josh.
Hi, guys. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Hey, Josh.
First off, well, I have 3 questions that I'll kind of tie together. I'll probably only get to one of them, but I'll make it as quick as possible. First, I want to thank the atheist community of Boston. I've been a listener of the Atheist Experience for about 10 years now, and I just really appreciate all you guys do. You've helped me on my continuous journey to intellectual honesty and secularism, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, I'd like to quickly talk to John and just applaud you and Traci Harris, if she's listening, for a conversation you had with a woman named Suzanne in Idaho. It was a few weeks ago, possibly a couple months ago, but it was on the difference between pro-life and anti-choice.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd just like to say, I'd like to say that it was very articulate, and it's something that a lot of people need to hear, and it's a very sticky situation to deal with, and I just appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And also one last little thing, I can make a fish follow a laser pointer, so I don't know if that is considered a fetch, but...
Until you can get it to follow it out to the mailbox, I don't think we've solved my problem.
Correct. Okay, so I'll get to my question real quick. I have an issue that I continuously hear from apologists, and specifically from Jordan Peterson. I think he's a brilliant man and appreciate his insight on many different subjects, but he upsets me in one very important way.
Just one.
A lot of your callers, well, yeah, many, but one that's very important to me, and it's because I have a nihilist friend who doesn't believe that there is value in existence. I'm sure you deal with that a lot.
I'm actually shooting a video on that tomorrow. There is no intrinsic value to human existence.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, I will watch that.
There's plenty of value, just not intrinsic value.
See, and I mean, yeah, you might, I disagree, but you might be able to convince me that I don't have the correct thought process on this. I see existence as sort of binary to non-existence. So it's non-existence is a 0 while existence is a 1.
Yeah.
And to me, that's already intrinsic value. And that might just be abstract. It might be.
Value is something that we imbue things with. There is no value without a thinking agent to value it.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, I'm not going to go through everything. The video will be out before the end of the week, and I don't want to go through all the arguments here because we're already over time. We got 4 more calls to get to. So go ahead and hit what you were talking about other than intrinsic value.
Okay. I just did want to make one last point on that I hear a lot of people say that science cannot lead to morality. And I just, or that a naturalistic view on existence can't lead to morality. And that's kind of what I'm getting at here is that I am not nihilist. And it seems that Jordan Peterson and a lot of other of your callers are afraid of nihilism. And they're afraid that if perhaps they give up their religiosity or their theism, that they might fall into nihilism.
Yes, and it's exactly what I combat as much as I can.
Yeah, I noticed that. And I feel like, for me personally, and again, I'll watch the video tomorrow to see if I'm thinking correctly on this, but I see that binary value, like it's sort of a domino effect for me, because I see a single-celled organism that's driven by whatever it's driven by. I'm sorry, I'm a layman's in evolution and physics and all of that, but it seems to be driven to continue to exist and continue to exist in the state that it exists and improve that existence, whether improve is the correct word or not. But I see that already as a value. And even things like energy and matter.
Listen to what you just said. You see that as a value. You're absolutely correct. I see it as a value too. But that's us seeing value. Without us, there's no value. There's nothing intrinsic.
You're absolutely right.
Yep. Spoiler alert for later this week.
No, you're absolutely right. I agree with that. I feel like Jordan Peterson and people like him who tend to sort of smuggle in God and smuggle in the value for God. Like it seems, I don't want to mischaracterize him, but it seems like he's afraid that maybe Sam Harris's perception on morality and the moral landscape and your perception of morality, it seems that he contends with the idea that there is value in anything without God. And I really want to contend that he is doing the same thing. He's smuggling in the value for God, whereas he's accusing us of smuggling in value for life.
Yeah, not only that, but he's accused us of essentially not being atheists, which is something when he and I were on stage in Toronto, that's essentially one of the stronger points. And yes, he's often confusing in the way that he speaks, so I don't want to paraphrase him too much, but essentially he was making an argument that basically without God everything is permissible, and if you were really an atheist you would rationalize, or you could and potentially would rationalize reasons to kill people, for example, and it's and I challenged him on it during the discussion, where I pointed out to the crowd that essentially he has a very negative view of what the world would be like if we were really atheists. But don't worry, because he doesn't think we're really atheists. And we have made a god of reason or a god of something else, and so that makes us theists. And what he's doing there is speaking entirely in utilitarian metaphors, rather than talking about what is. And it's funny for me, especially having had dinner with the man and sat with him on stage and talked, there are questions you can ask Jordan that are matters of fact in the world, and you'll get a fairly straightforward answer. He will speak from authority when it's about facts of psychology, which may be fuzzy fucking facts to start with.
Some of them are.
And then as soon as you get into other things, all of a sudden it's, well, I'd need a bunch of months to study whether Jesus was real or not, but I guess I could kind of identify as a Christian, and he's throwing God language in because he, I think, and I can't really say what his motivations are, but it seems to me that his motivations are about the utility of it, that it's useful for people to believe in God, even in a metaphorical sense, because that has an effect on our life. And I would agree, believing in God, even in a metaphorical sense, does impact your life. But that doesn't mean that not believing in God is necessarily worse. And when I'm only concerned with the fact of whether or not there's a God, because there's a right way and a wrong way to live, can we find it without a God? How would we go about it? That seems to be a really important question, considering we spent thousands of years now waiting for someone to come up with a valid and sound argument for God, and they've all failed.
See, and I think that's really valuable that you sort of outlined him talking about the importance of believing in a God. He tends to go to evolution to talk about the importance of God and religion and theism in our evolution. And
and now Hector is up.
Here. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that Hector's here because I'd like to actually talk about that, and especially tribalism. Because to me, this, and again, this is just to me, of course, but I see that binary value as the ultimate tribalism. There's non-existence, there's existence. We are part of one of those tribes, if that even makes sense. It does to me. I apologize if it doesn't.
I don't know how non-existent tribe makes sense, but...
Exactly, yeah. But we are part of existence. We are not existent. And that, to me, is the first value you find in reality. The first value. And to me, that's evolutionary. That is space, time, matter coming together in some way to be existent and not to not exist. And that, to me, is a value. And maybe that's just as... maybe that's the opposite of what Jordan is doing, and I'm smuggling in value on that. But I see that as a value.
If so, you're smuggling it in the only way that I know how or that I would think is justified.
Well, that makes me feel better about that.
Well, I could be wrong, so don't feel too good. But, yeah.
Right. It just seems reasonable to me that if I exist, I should value existence until it becomes so unbearable that it's not valuable to me anymore.
Yeah, now we're on to a completely different thing. Because first of all,
absolutely,
the fact that you do value existence is independent from whether or not you should value existence. We smuggled an ought question in there. But I understand what you're saying. And it's one of the reasons why I support, notions about death with dignity and stuff like that, because I think that I value individuals' autonomy, and that if your life is such that you don't want to continue it for good reasons, it's a lot more complicated than that, then I would support the individual ending their life in a responsible way. I also think, though, that we have a duty for the fostering of society to distinguish between people who have good reasons to potentially want to end their life and somebody who's just hyperbolic at a specific point when there is a strong likelihood that their life will improve once they get over the present circumstance.
Absolutely. And you brought up society. I think my initial question that I had asked the call screener was about secular humanism. Mm-hmm. Maybe secular morality is better. But just a better word to use. But my question was, how do we account for, in our secular humanism, how do we account for things like animals, plants, potentially aliens, other species? And I think that's what I'm trying to do here with this binary value that I'm smuggling in.
Account for them how? What do you mean?
Well, because I don't want to put anything, I don't want to put the life of a plant or an animal as equal to a human, because I am a human and my society is human and all of that. Well, we understand that.
Sure.
But I want to be able to account for, not just, running over a squirrel because I think it's fun, or not just, stomping on grass and pulling it out or cutting down trees because I think it's fun. If it's valuable to my survival, or in some ways, if it's valuable to my just enjoyment of life,
this is easy.
Be permissible.
This is easy and incredibly difficult. So here we go. You're worried about hedonistic tendencies of, if my sole motivation for doing something is that I enjoy it, maybe I could be wrong about what the potential consequences are. That's the reason not to do it, because you don't have enough information to predict what's going to happen in the future. Maybe that squirrel that you enjoyed running over is actually going to make it into somebody's backyard, somebody recovering from a mental illness, and they feed that squirrel and it becomes their companion. You don't know what's going to happen. So the notion that you can, and perhaps should in many cases, do things for pleasure does not mean that you have considered all the potential consequences. And so in the absence of a really solid summary of all the eventualities, there are, erring on the side of caution seems prudent. It's like, oh, I'm never going to need this. It's how we get to hoarders, though, which is probably a bad thing. I don't think I'm ever going to need this, but I'm going to keep it just in case I do. There needs to be a rational process of saying, you know, no, you're never going to need that particular magazine from 1972 that doesn't have anything in there that you would need to reference, because there's also an online version or whatever. It's a complicated thing, but at the end of the day, I think in much the same way you're talking about Peterson and others fearing nihilism, they're also fearing hedonism, that if we don't have these values instilled with us from the alpha god or the religions based on them, then we just won't have those values. And that's not true.
No.
My life is not valuable to me because somebody said there's a God who holds it in value. It's valuable because I think it's valuable. And the same thing's true for the people in my life.
Other species can have empathy. Other species can have notions of fairness. We know that. So those are kind of the rudiments of morality. So
one of my favorite videos are those chimps that are getting really pissed off about the unfair treatment.
One gets a grape and one, exactly. Mm-hmm.
But on that note, Josh, we got to try and move on to these other callers and finish out the day. But I appreciate your time, and call us back sometime.
I will. I'll call again, and we'll talk a little bit more about abstractions and logical absolutes. I hope that'll be fun.
You might want to do that in an email, because I doubt I'm going to go through that again on the show. But thanks either way.
Okay, no problem.
Thanks, Josh.
We have Bonnie in Wisconsin. Thank you for waiting through the whole show. What have you've got something about trees?
Yes. I was a JW for 50 years, and I woke up from religion about 4 years ago. And basically the Bible, and what actually woke me up was studying Exodus from that first caller. When I got to slavery, it's like my eyes got opened. But anyway, the reason I'm calling, we had a book, Evolutionary Creation, which is probably, I think, one of the best ones to convince people that there's a God, from creation. And Richard Dawkins actually talks about that book in the God Delusion. So I was coming across an account in the Bible in 1 Kings chapter 18 the other day, and I thought, wow, this is the perfect answer to the creation argument. And it's when Elijah kills the 400 prophets of Baal. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Roughly.
They had a famine, and so anyway, he called all the prophets of Baal together, and they cut up 2 bulls, and anyway, the prophets of Baal, they prayed and they cried and everything else, and they couldn't get the bulls to burn. And he says, what's wrong? Is your God, is Baal on the toilet, or is he sleeping, or whatever? And so then anyway, Elijah took his bull, and he put it on the pile of wood, and he even had him dump water all over it. And so then he called on Jehovah, and Jehovah burned it. And so then, and they even took up all the water that was in the trenches. And so then all these people, in Israel, because he was saying, why are you limping on 2 different opinions, Baal or God? So they, God, Jehovah, he's the real God, and so then then Elijah went and killed all the Baal prophets. My question is,
should we kill everybody who doesn't change their mind? Because that would be a great question.
No.
Okay.
No, my question is, and I listened to a sermon a couple of days ago about that account, and he says, why doesn't God perform miracles? And then he says, he does sometimes. My question is, would that account be in the Bible if Elijah had said, look at all of the trees. Look at the creation.
Oh, that's great.
That would not be in the Bible if he did that, because the Baal worshippers could have said the very same thing. Exactly. So the reason it's in the Bible is because Jehovah gave him evidence. So, how can they come down on us for saying we want evidence?
Yeah.
Because he mocked him. He says, where is he? Is he on the toilet?
I realize that, but to take it seriously for half a second, one of the reasons that they're not going to say that is because they can't say, well, God caught that wet wood on fire in the Bible there, because I don't believe that happened. So they can't present me with the evidence that was presented then. So the best they can do is look at the trees.
And they also can't recreate the experiment now with the bull in the fire and, you know, and expect it to actually happen that way.
Yeah, but the other thing is believers deflect the hypocrisy you see in the Bible like nothing. So there's plenty of that.
I would ask them, I'd say, would that be in the Bible? If they said, look at the trees, would that be in the Bible? Then they'd have to say no.
Well, to be fair,
it's stupid.
It is in the Bible. To be fair,
I mean, they'd have to say it's not in the Bible. If Elijah had said to the Baal or to the Israelites, look at the trees.
No, I mean, look at the trees is in the Bible.
Huh?
Look at the trees is in the Bible. The passage from Romans that says the invisible workings of him.
Well, I know.
Yeah,
but I mean, if you know, if you were going to turn them to that, I mean, I'm sticking up for us atheists here.
Yep.
And I would say, why wouldn't that be that would not be in the Bible, correct? If he said, look at the trees, and they'd have to say, why wouldn't that be in the Bible? And they'd have to say, because the Baal worshippers could have said the same thing.
It's a great point. It ties into what Hector's talking about with the history of religion, in that the mindset of the ancient Israelites, as it was for many other people, was not, hey, we have the one and only God. It's our God is better than your God. Right. And Moses did the same thing. You put Moses up against the temple priests, and, they can do magic tricks, but God's magic tricks are better. That's clearly the way they thought back then. And it does add that befuddlement of the fact that miracles seem to drop off at the rate in which we're capable of investigating them increases. Once upon a time, boy, he was lighting wet wood on fire in front of everybody.
Keeping them from lions. Yeah,
pillar cloud by day, pillar fire by night, manna from heaven, and now it's God help me find my keys.
Yeah. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that. I thought it was kind of a good example.
I like it, Bonnie. Thanks a lot, and thanks so much for patiently waiting through the show.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Bonnie.
We have Tim in San Diego.
How's it going, Matt?
Pretty good.
Well, I have two questions that I want to address, and I'll just get right to it. And one of my questions is specifically for you, Matt. But do either of you think that the fear of hell could be considered a good thing when you're talking about someone that's contemplating suicide?
Sure.
That it might stop them?
Sure. And it's like there's a scenario for almost anything where you could think that this could be better than an alternative. My concern is whether or not it's true. And for dealing with people who are suicidal is, well, I'm probably not going to talk about it much because I'm not going to pretend to have any expertise, despite the fact that it has happened. It's kind of like when somebody calls and tells me that they've been in Alcoholics Anonymous for years and they've been sober, because AA is awful. They don't publish their recidivism rates. The method is, there's no way you can demonstrate that the method's reliable, but by and large, there are people who are convinced that it's helped them. I think they've replaced one addiction with another, but if AA is what is keeping you sober, keep going. And for the people who've called in before in the past, to say, oh, if there was no God, I'd be running around killing people, then I want your ass in church. And so if somebody was suicidal and the only thing that was preventing them from doing it was a fear of hell, then yeah, I could say that could be a positive thing. It might be the only thing that allows you to keep helping them to where you might be able to prevent this.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's research looking at highly religious versus non-religious, and there's relatively less suicide because of the prescriptions for suicide. But what about good old-fashioned mental health treatment? I think that would be a better approach than believing in an afterlife that terrifies children and all that kind of stuff.
That's exactly it.
All the side effects of having that. It may be a salve for that, but there are side effects, just like a problematic medication or something.
The challenge I had for years was not demonstrate how a religious untruth can be beneficial. It was demonstrate how a religious truth was necessary. That there's anything that you could accomplish through religion that you couldn't also accomplish through secular means. Because I can lie to somebody. I don't have to give them a fear of hell. I can just say that, oh, what happens after you commit suicide in particular is that you come back and you're a cockroach. And that could, I mean, that's just as asinine, but it might be the thing that gets them past it. But in much the same way that we talk about dealing with death, and I'm really happy for organizations like Grief Beyond Belief and others that are changing the way secular people get a chance to learn and understand this. I think religion has poisoned our minds and our culture about death, and that if people understood that death is an eventual part of life, and that we get, as far as we can tell, exactly one shot at life, that would fundamentally change both how we treat each other prior to death. It would change the grieving process. It would change the fictions that we tell ourselves. Traci, who called in earlier, who is still struggling with the fact that she might not meet her fiance in an afterlife, that's a powerful idea to hang on to. But if instead of having been fed this lie of an afterlife from the beginning, if we had, dealt with this is what life is, and sometimes it's going to end, and here's how you can prepare yourself and how you can view this. It's never going to make it easy. I mean, but there are ways to make it better without, I think, lying.
Sure. Ernest Becker, he's an American anthropologist, wrote this book called Denial of Death. We're in such a state of denial in this culture in particular. We shield ourselves from it, and so it becomes it's so foreign to us when it happens, because we say, in fact, death doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. There's in the afterlife, you're going to meet with all your relatives and angels playing harp, so don't worry about it. So in a way, that creates more fear of it, because you're saying, look, we can't accept it. We have to invent this. And so, yeah, I think being honest about what happens when you die is probably a better approach.
There's another lie that ties in with this as well, which is something that Rush Limbaugh and others have promoted when it comes to issues like climate change. Well, God put us here as stewards of the earth. God's going to come back. There's absolutely nothing, if that story is true, if that narrative is true, that God's going to come back and rapture people, and then there's nothing we can do to destroy the planet. Everything's going to happen according to God's plan. So we don't need to worry about carbon emissions. We don't need to worry about pollution. We don't need to worry about any of these other things. And there's mountains of problems with that. But what it is it is a lie that could be used to get somebody to do one thing that we would find beneficial, and yet 100 things that are detrimental. On that note, Tim, I got to move on. We got to get to one last call before we're done here today. I appreciate your time, though.
I can't ask one more question for just you.
Okay, go.
I told my mother yesterday that the next girl I date, religion is going to be a deal breaker for me. And my parents are Christian, and they want to see me with a Christian girl. My last girlfriend was Catholic. The last girlfriend before that was Jewish. But I'm kind of sick of wanting to fight with people about it or argue with people about it. So for a long time, I just pretend to believe and I go along with it. And I don't think that's the right thing. But my mom was like, well, if you bring an atheist over, where's she going to get her moral compass?
From an evaluation of the consequences of her action and the fact that she has to share a planet with a bunch of other people, exercising empathy and actually wanting good results.
Right. And we all have to share this planet together and empathize with each other. And I went home and I looked up secular humanism and, things like that. I don't want to have a relationship with my mom where I tell her and my stepdad the truth that I've been an agnostic for years, but I'm more kind of leaning towards atheism now, having listened to your show for so long.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned on the show that, your relationship with your mom and, people in your family might think that you're doing the work of the devil.
They do.
So how do you go about, having a relationship with your family still?
We focus on the things that we share. The fact that we're family, the fact that we have similar interests, the fact that our lives are intertwined. It's probably, my folks and I disagree on religion. We disagree on politics. We disagree on countless individual issues within politics, but there are still things that we care about and share. Now, I have good visits and interactions with my parents. They love me. I love them. We disagree. We've had, knockdown, drag-out arguments on occasion. And yeah, they think I'm working for Satan, but somehow they've rationalized this. I recognize it. This is their problem, not mine. It is their religion that is standing as the roadblock. They are going to look at it in the opposite way, and I realize that that's the way they're going to look at it. And so we generally don't talk about religion. We have on a couple of rare occasions. But there are, I don't want to use like the cliche, there are more things that unite us than divide us, because in reality, there aren't. My folks and I don't actually have all that much in common other than they're my parents. And so what we're leveraging, I suppose, is our history. The fact that they cared about me, they raised me, they did the best they could. They weren't evil. The fact that they tried to share their beliefs with me wasn't from animosity. It was, they were trying to do the best they could. I don't blame them. I'm not mad at them. I wish they'd be more reasonable, and they wish I'd be more godly. And once, things will never go back to normal, but there can be a new normal, and it's not always bad. Greta Christina wrote a book where she interviewed 400 atheists on coming out. And I might get the numbers wrong, but I think of all the people that she interviewed, only one of them actually regretted it. Lots of them had bad experiences that stayed bad, and yet they were fine with it. Some of them had bad experiences that ultimately got better, and much the way that mine did. But only one person said, I really wish I would have never done this, because there's an incredible value in having people love and appreciate you for who you are and not who they hope you are or who you're pretending to be. You're the only one that can make a decision about what's right for you. I know couples who have different views on religion, that with marriages that lasted far longer than mine did, and I was married to an atheist. So, you date who you like, be yourself, figure out whether or not you're comfortable with the consequences, and I would not make a big coming out deal out of it. It would just be, answer honestly, and they're going to ask questions, and then you and your family can sort it out. I know people who've been ostracized by their family, and then I know people who found out that there were other people in their family, including parents, who were pretty much on the same. Dan Barker, parents of ministers, convinced his parents, and now they're atheists. I think that's highly unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Dan is pretty effective, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to just get it off my chest and just tell them the truth, because it's killing me, and I'm sure they have a pretty good idea already that, I haven't been going to church, and, I still take my hat off and close my eyes when we pray at the dinner table, and I'm respectful.
Yeah,
but,
I sit there quietly when they pray too.
As far as hell and heaven and God, I don't know, and that's something I hear you say a lot, and I don't know. They could be real. They might not. But I've been on the fence for so long. I just don't want my stepdad and my mom to be like, oh, well, you're going to hell, and your kids are going to hell, and your wife's going to hell, because I don't agree with what they believe in. But I guess you're right. At the end of the day, it's what they believe in. I don't want to change their minds. I just want them to accept me still.
Yep. And I got no guarantees for you in any direction.
They may or may not.
Yeah.
But you have to do what's right for you.
And we wish you well, Tim.
At some point, but yeah, I'll let you take care of the call. Thanks.
And by all means, when you make a decision, if you decide to do it, call back and let us know how it went.
Yeah.
Okay, I will.
And find a local group in your area.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're going to need friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks.
Thanks, bye.
All right. We've gone way over time. We have exactly one caller left, and I promised to get through the whole queue. So Nathan in Orlando, thanks for waiting. It says you wanted to talk about why you believe in God,
Hi.
so you're already leaps and bounds ahead of a previous caller.
Hi, Matt. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Nathan.
I'm getting celebrated here on the chat room because I claimed earlier that I have a little bit of proof of God.
Cool.
A little bit of evidence.
Okay.
And I wanted to talk about two things that really don't get talked about a lot on the show. Matt, are you familiar with the Joe Rogan Experience?
I know what it is, and I know who Joe is. I don't know that I've listened to more than a few minutes of it at a time.
Okay. Well, he talks a lot about DMT. It's dimethyltryptamine.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that, and with Joe's fondness for drugs.
Well, a lot of people will call it drugs, but it's a chemical compound that exists in the brain, in the pineal gland.
Yep.
And for a lot of people that don't know, psilocybin and Amanita muscaria mushroom have really formed a lot of the pagan religions, such as Christmas, and there's even pillars in Egypt that are shaped like a mushroom. The mushroom is a very important aspect when it comes to spirituality.
Okay.
So
I don't know how are we getting? Yeah, okay. I'm just trying to get to the evidence for a God.
My burden of proof is that, and I'm not advocating this chemical compound, but if you ingest a quote unquote correct amount, a correct dosage, that all the experiences are the same across the board.
That's bullshit.
You come in contact with a divine. Well,
that is
not, because it's been studied by Terence McKenna. It's been studied by a lot of scientists.
Yeah, the very notion that scientists are going to say that the experiences are the same. Okay, what is the correct dose? How do they determine it? And how do they know that people are having the same experiences versus reporting similar experiences? And oh, by the way, the fact that somebody had an experience on drugs is irrelevant to whether or not there is a God.
Well, how is it irrelevant?
Okay. Gee, is it possible that people could take drugs, have an experience that they identify with a supernatural being, and it also be the case that the being isn't real?
Well, how do we go about that? We determine that.
No. I'm asking. So, is it possible for somebody to hallucinate a God that isn't real?
That is possible, yeah.
Correct. That's why it's irrelevant to say that a bunch of people took some DMT and reported these experiences. I believe that they took a drug. I believe that they had an experience. I don't believe that their experience in any way demonstrates or could demonstrate that a God exists.
But you're trying to demonstrate that off of facts and evidence?
What the fuck else would you use to demonstrate something with facts and evidence?
Well, you're talking about something that's spiritual and transparent. How are you able to determine that from hardcore facts that belong to the physical world?
How did you determine it without facts and evidence?
Because knowledge is really about facts and ideas that we, through observation and experience, and wisdom is the ability to discern that knowledge and apply it to your life. You're trying to take facts and knowledge and apply it to something that is religious and transparent and spiritual. So how are you supposed to, as an atheist, go from there? Fundamentally, you don't believe in it.
It's really easy. I am not convinced that there is a God because there isn't sufficient evidence to warrant that belief. You called to say you had evidence. Why would you call to say that you had evidence for God, and when I challenge you on it, say that facts and evidence don't apply?
Because these facts that I'm presenting from numerous studies that have been going on all demonstrate the same thing across the board.
They demonstrate that people get high and have experiences. They don't demonstrate that there's a God, and you've already acknowledged that it's possible.
They demonstrate the visions they see on the experience.
Okay, so they see visions. Does that prove that there's a God?
But they all see. No, you got to understand. They all see the same thing. It's a little.
I don't care if they all saw super mushroom. Magic strawberry, a flying super strawberry thing, that doesn't prove that there's a super strawberry. It just proves that people had the same.
I saw that when you talked to Jordan Peterson about the super strawberry thing.
Yes.
Nothing. You didn't take the correct dosage.
Okay.
There is the correct dosage to take.
Go take a correct dosage. I'm not wasting any more of my guest time since we've been on this long to take a call where somebody says that they have facts and evidence for God and then talks about facts and evidence not being relevant. So, you want to get high? Let's see if we can have a supernatural experience. I love the fact that there's so many people, and yeah, it's Rogan's fans and DMT, and they email all the time. It's like, oh my gosh, there's this drug, and it triggers this thing in your brain. It's natural in your brain, so it's not like you're ingesting some weird chemical. And then you have this experience, and they're all the same. Bullshit. There is no way that two people are having identical experiences.
Yeah, they're not all the same.
Yeah, and even if they were, that does not prove what he's trying to prove. It's like, I've taken loads of drugs. I talked about my acid trip during the thing with Jordan Peterson where I talked about super strawberry. At no point did it convince me that there was actually a realm of super strawberries and that they had a message and a mission for me in my life. I recognized, first of all, that I have less reasonable confidence in a brain that is chemically altered than one that is functioning properly. That we know through empirical studies, that when you're high, I don't care how much better you think you are at that video game you play, you're not. You're not. I ran the #1 Counter-Strike team in the United States for years. I've played games high. You're not better. That time dilation you're experiencing from all the weed, that is not actually time slowing down. And the experience that you have on DMT is not actually God. Both of those things would need to be demonstrated. But now I've gone off on a tirade about drugs, and last week it was about, or 2 weeks ago, it was about let's not shame sex workers. And a quick note for anybody who follows me on Facebook, I reposted a blog a post from Ginger Lynn that was talking about much the same thing, except she was also pointing out the double standards between the way women in porn and other sex workers are treated when it comes to accusations relevant to Me Too or whatever else. That there's this notion that because, and it's all framed wrong and phrased wrong, I'm buying you. No, you're not. I'm providing a service and you're paying for it. But we view sex in such a way that the accusations made by somebody who's a slut, who's a sex worker, who's a porn star, whatever, they are just have been disregarded. And I think now, and the point that she was trying to make in the blog is that there's a scarlet letter attached to this, and people are starting to make sense. And I thought it was a good article that was timely with everything else, and I wanted to share it. I was going to read it, but we've gone on too long for today. Thanks to everybody for coming out. Thanks to John, and special thanks to Hector Garcia.
Thank you.
His books, Alpha God and Sex Power and Partisanship, are that one will be available this week. This one's out. You can get the audiobook, you can get the real book, you can get both books. You can probably order an autographed copy if you send him $100 or so, something like that. But thanks so much for doing this. This is great.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, pleasure. Yeah, man.
Thanks to the hardest working crew in show business.
Amen.
Show yourselves. Or don't. There they are.
There they are.
And thanks to the studio audience for coming out and sticking around.
For a long show. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
If I would have been on, it would have been no problem anyway, but I'm just saying I'm not working here. So they see me and they're like, oh,
somebody that you know is like, oh, when did you start doing that?
Yeah, well, no, taking credit for, it's like taking credit.